Hi everyone, this is Nate with Stained Glass Stories, and I'm so duster that I'm in denial. Regardless of whether you discover them through TikTok, rate your music, or simply being an original fan, we're glad to have you here to take a space ride through the band's trajectory and discography. I was incredibly fortunate to have communicated with Clay Parton over email regarding Duster and other projects within its orbit, so I want to thank him for his time and insights sincerely. The questions I asked him will be sprinkled throughout this video. And remember, subscribe to our channel so we can quit our day jobs and upload videos more than twice a year. But most importantly, get comfortable, whatever that entails, and enjoy the multi-dimensional story of Duster. Clay Parton and Kanan Dove Amber were still teenagers when they were involved with their first band, and the duo were two of the formative members of Mohinder. The group formed in Cupertino, a city on the outskirts of San Jose, California. Mohinder had a manic and aggressive energy, which sounds influenced by groups like Black Flag, Bad Brains, and Husker Du. This is not to say they were some derivative post-hardcore outfit. Mohinder was one of the early influencers of the California screamo scene. Quite an impressive accomplishment for a teenage band that would only be active for a year. I asked Clay, who were your musical inspirations while you were active with Mohinder and Calm? I'm hearing some potential influence from Black Flag, Misfits, and Husker Du. Are there groups that influenced you in modern times? He replied, I think we started Mohinder when we were 15 to 17 years old, and we were listening to whatever modern punk, hardcore, and tangential stuff at the time. Heroin, Antioch Arrow, Carcass, Anti-Schism, Sleep, Neurosis, Crossed Out, Born Against, Rorschach, Fugazi, Sonic Youth, Codeine, Seam, Tortoise, Trans AM, Slayer, Bikini Kill, Misfits. But we were also finding older stuff like The Stooges, Susie and the Banshees, and Black Sabbath. Music wasn't available like it is today, and we were pretty broke all the time, so getting a hold of music that was new to us seemed very drawn out looking back now. You'd encounter something and spend way more time considering it then, because the next thing wasn't just a swipe away. Everything was scarce, so when we'd get like a Slint or a My Bloody Valentine record, it would be in heavy rotation in our house for weeks. Later on, we worked at record stores, so the house started filling up with all kinds of records. But I remember very early on, we had dubbed cassettes of like wild funk music just called Rare Grooves or something. We thought it was sick. We didn't know anything about it. It's harder to experience those kinds of mysteries today. For a lot of people, anything you want is available, and available to be dismissed in seconds. After releasing a couple of EPs, Mohinder disbanded in '94, and Parton and Amber helped form their second band, Calm. Nearly all the formative members of Mohinder were involved with Calm, which was active from '94 to '96. I love the names of their three EPs, by the way: Calm, and Moonraker. They were a collection of bedroom recordings that were longer, slower, and more atmospheric than the music from Mohinder. This is speculation on my part, but it seems like the name Calm was a response to the harsher sounds that they had created previously. These tracks are, in fact, calmer. So the next thing I asked him about was the change in sound. I've noticed with Mohinder, Calm, and early Duster releases, there's a shift in sound from something aggressive to spacey. Was this a reflection of developing the sound you wanted to create, or was it more so the change in bandmates? He replied, I think it was just the widening of interests, like finding jazz or classical music or whatever that we were into, and then dissecting things in our own ignorant way. We're high school dropouts, and never had any musical training or anything, so we get to absorb and enjoy music like dummies. I recommend this method, or at the very least appreciate it myself, because I don't get distracted thinking about theory or modes or whatever. I can still lay on the floor and get completely destroyed by a snare sound. During Mohinder, Kanan and I were probably refining our drumming by listening to Mitch Mitchell's playing on Axis Bold as Love, or Bill Ward on the first few Sabbath records, more so than the punk stuff we came up on. We did not play drums on Mohinder or Calm recordings, but we were consumed by drums. No interest in guitar solos or guitar shredding at all, just drums. It's funny that Duster drums are mostly so simple. Eventually we got a cassette 4-track machine and became absolutely obsessed with recording. We'd use the 4-track as part of the songwriting process, instead of a pure documenter of a song that's already complete. To me, Calm is the group that bridged the wildly different qualities of Mohinder and Duster. Their music still has post-hardcore elements, but with each EP, they were becoming spacier. I want to shout out the song name Silk Wrapped Hands in a Masquerade. Even when things are picture blue, I keep it under my pillow now just in case there's nothing left to do, outrun myself. The time it takes to say that is about the same length as some of the tracks from Mohinder. Calm disbanded in 1996. But what's that I see? A new project is beginning to orbit over the stratosphere. Parton and Amber formed Duster in 1996. As Parton described it, their DIY setup consisted of shitty old guitars, shitty old microphones, and stolen cassettes recorded on a 4-track at home. But these limitations are what helped define Duster's dreary sound, and they continue to use this technology into the 2020s. The next thing I inquired about is how they viewed these limitations. I read that you create music with shitty old guitars, shitty old microphones, and stolen cassettes. Do you view these limitations as an asset to creating your distinct sound? He replied, it could be an asset, partially the sonic part of things, but also mentally. If you have a dead fret somewhere or some wild intonation issue, maybe that's going to force you to play something a different way. Maybe you'll have to drop a note from a guitar chord completely, but now that actually opens up what the bass can do there. It can maybe change that chord into a completely different thing. Microphones were a problem for us because they were expensive. It was hard to find them used. The internet wasn't a thing. I mean, I think it might have newly existed, but it was rough at the time and we weren't on it. You could find a microphone at a thrift store once in a while, or a half-decent deal at a pawn shop maybe once, so we ended up with just a few pretty awful options. Our friend Tom had a recording studio called Trainwreck. I think he would work all day at UPS and then record punk bands all night at his studio. Calm recorded there, and he helped transfer songs from our 4-track onto DAT for Stratosphere. He also recorded Valium Aggelein's Black Moon, and later I brought his Otari tape machine to record 1975 and Contemporary Movement. Anyway, he turned us on to realistic PZM microphones, the Radio Shack version of the Crown Pressure Zone microphone. Back then they had a big metal plate, but nowadays the Crown ones are little plastic paddles, and Radio Shack stopped making realistic stuff in the 90s. Always thought that was a goofy brand name. Shit was almost real, I guess, but the Radio Shack ones were dirt cheap and drums sounded great with them on the 4-track. We lived in a shadow of Silicon Valley, so you could find odd microphones like that at computer electronic junk warehouses, kind of like a thrift store for electronics. We do have a couple non-shitty guitars and some non-shitty recording equipment now, but I still most often play the Intermarks and Teisco adjacent guitars. I asked him about how Duster didn't really seem to have any assigned instruments to any band member. So I said, what I find particularly interesting about Duster is that there never seemed to be any assigned roles. From what I've read, you, Kanan, and Jason all provided vocals, guitars, drums, etc. Did this come from having an idea and wanting to play it regardless of instrument? In response, he said, yeah, it started as Kanan and I just recording all the time. If one of us were home alone, we could just make a song by ourselves in a few hours or a day. So there's some songs where it's just one of us doing everything. The 4-track made this kind of the preferred method anyway. We'd record drums on a couple of tracks, then maybe a guitar on the 3rd track, then bounce those down to 1 track, and have 3 open to add another guitar, bass, and vocals. Or sometimes more rounds of bouncing, so we'd squeeze way more than 4 tracks out of it. So this process didn't make sense for recording several people live at once. Plus how I was saying that songs were being written while we recorded them. We recorded drums without knowing exactly how a change would happen, or what the other instruments might end up doing at all. When we started working with Up Records, they wanted us to record a few songs for Stratosphere in Seattle. I think in order to pay for that trip, we had to play some shows while we were there, so we asked Jason, who was living in our basement, if he wanted to play drums at those shows, and on whatever songs we recorded. He played drums on 3 of the 4 songs we recorded on that trip, and then was in the band after that. I'm not sure if he played anything except piano part on 1975. It's a great part though. And then on Contemporary Movement, he played drums on maybe 3 songs. Get the Dutch, Travelogue, Cooking, ? And then guitar, bass, vocals on Travelogue and Unrecovery. He was the main songwriter on those 2. On Contemporary Movement, we were recording on 16-track and had collected more microphones, so we could record more than one thing at a time more easily. So there was more involvement in each other's songs. In all the earliest stuff, and most of the later stuff too, whoever is singing it wrote the song or most of the song. But there are exceptions, mostly on Contemporary Movement. For example, I wrote Cooking, but got Jason to play drums on it, and got Kanan to sing it. Duster's first EP, On the Dodge, sounds slightly different from their future releases, more acoustic and twangy, but the core elements of Duster are present, whether it's the minimal and sleepy vocals or the shoddy lo-fi atmosphere. Also, Darby is almost certainly an early version of Gold Dust. On the Dodge is only 24 minutes long, but it's rife with experimentation that makes it spellbinding. It's 2025 and I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, but when I hear On the Dodge, I'm in the mountains of Northern California on a rainy day in the summer of '96. Before we move on to their next EP, there are a few songs I want to acknowledge that stand out to me. I love Parton and Amber's harmonizing vocals and Lullaby, and the prominent organs on Distance. The Tribal Life also stood out to me for its massive bass sound. The same year On the Dodge was released, Duster recorded the demo Christmas Dust. Sort of an additional project to their early recordings. It featured an early version of a song that would appear on their next EP called My Friends Are Cosmonauts, and 4 untitled numbers. The demo is a lonely interlude between On the Dodge and their next official release. The second Duster EP, Transmission Flux, came a year after On the Dodge. It's very short, just under 10 minutes long. However, it moves closer to a sound familiar to their future albums such as Stratosphere or Contemporary Movement. The alt-country sensibilities of On the Dodge are replaced with a more polished sound. Of course, with this being Duster, it's still lo-fi and mellow. The intro Orbitron is shaped by raw and noisy guitars until the vocals enter. I love the first line, "You know the clock is ticking down and no one's in control." Relatable. Stars Will Fall is gorgeously sad, like a musical manifestation of the nihilistic thoughts that keep you up at night. Perhaps describing their music like this will make some potential listeners reluctant to hear it, but I think Duster has a remarkable ability to make these dark moments beautiful, and maybe even a bit more bearable. Around the same time Duster recorded their first album between 1997 and 1998, 2 albums were released under the moniker Valium Aggelein. The project consisted of all 3 original band members, and both records were recorded within only a few days. While born from the same roots as Duster, Valium Aggelein sounds like a more twisted, eerie version of the band. The 2 albums that debuted under this name, Dweller on the Threshold and Hier kommt, schwartze Mond, place a heavier emphasis on post-rock and space rock, as well as krautrock. The influence of krautrock is also reflected in the fact that all titles on Hier kommt, schwartze Mond are in German, albeit with questionable grammar and spelling. I asked him about the influences of Valium Aggelein. I was curious to know more about the influences of their side project, so I asked him, with Valium Aggelein, it sounded like there may have been some influences from krautrock groups like Can and Faust. Is this true or was it something different? He replied, for sure. Probably some mix of Can, Flying Saucer Attack, Live at Pompeii, and Stereolab. The lyrical themes revolve around space, but vocals are only sparsely scattered across long instrumental passages. Both albums feel raw, loose, and haunting, like distant radio signals bouncing off the stars. They capture the feeling of being a lonesome traveler lost in the infinite darkness of the universe, mercilessly drifting further from home while slowly floating toward an endless void. 1998 was arguably the most prolific years for the members of Duster. Not only was this the year they debuted the aforementioned Hier kommt, schwartze Mond, but Duster would also release an EP and their most celebrated studio album. The name of said EP was Apex Trance-Like, and it only consisted of 2 songs, 4 Hours and Light Years. Both are incredibly gorgeous, lacking any immediacy, but in the best way possible. 4 Hours literally slows down as it progresses, and the word disappear is repeated. Light Years is mostly instrumental, and it beautifully unwinds into something atmospheric as the drums fade out and the organ becomes more prominent. Though Apex Trance-Like is less than 8 minutes, its unhurried recordings are hypnotizing and captivating. It's like Duster can fuck the fabric of time. The studio album Stratosphere is now Duster's most recognized project. Nowadays, you can find the gray, green, and yellow album cover on handbags, socks, and t-shirts. Its songs are TikTokified, and online communities like Rate Your Music have elevated it to one of the highest rated albums on the site. But Stratosphere barely made a peep when it was released in February of '98. It was their first project as a trio, as Jason Albertini was recruited to play drums. He had previously played with Clay and Kanan for Valium Aggelein. I don't think there's any other album out there that more effectively effectively speaks to those quiet moments in life, whether it's walking alone in your neighborhood or those restless nights. For me personally, I couldn't have discovered Stratosphere at a more perfect time. I was working overnight shifts during the peak of COVID in a 24-hour home for people living with mental illness. That's about as isolating as it gets, but it made those solitary moments beautiful and something I came to appreciate. Maybe Duster's music is a reminder to slow down every once in a while, as life passes by all too quickly. Earth Moon Transit isn't just one of my favorite Duster songs, but one of my favorite songs of all time. And who will write the hits with Bowie back on Earth is such an incredible lyric. The repeating riff has such a feeling of despair, a certain heaviness that transcends the listener beyond Earth. Another highlight is the titular track, which is completely instrumental. It's shaped by droning guitar noise and an intensifying percussion. For me, it captures the surreal state of mind between sleep and wakefulness, when consciousness begins to transition into something vivid. Gold Dust reminds me of a quiet, lonesome drive home after a long day at work. The theme of transition seems to be omnipresent throughout Stratosphere, whether it's awake or asleep, the Earth or the Moon, or sunrise and sunset. Few albums can communicate these subtle changes so effectively and beautifully, and perhaps this is one of the reasons why Duster's music resonates with so many people. An EP titled 1975 was released in late 1999. It carried the same melancholic sound Duster is known for, but introduced a subtle shift towards a more song-oriented approach. The arrangements are more stripped back, the layers less dense, and the vocals rise slightly closer to the surface, giving the record a fragile and a more intimate atmosphere. Much of the EP's dynamic comes not from distortion, but from the quiet push and pull of ethereal synths meandering in and out, creating gentle currents of motion. On the final recording, Want No Light to Shine, you can hear a real piano playing in the distance, its notes slowly fading into silence as the record concludes. While in Stratosphere, Jason Albertini had only participated as a drummer, by the time of 1975, he had become much more involved in the creative process, playing additional instruments and contributing to the record's production. It's a ghost town, dreaming. By the time of their second album, Contemporary Movement, Duster had traded the cosmic abstractions of their earlier work for something more grounded, continuing the more structured songwriting approach of 1975. The buzzing drones are dialed back, and the vocals are more defined. In line with the album's more direct sound, the lyrics shifted away from interstellar themes towards something more personal, often deeply introspective subject matter. The Breakup suite, for example, captures the fallout of a failed relationship and the process of working through regret and self-doubt. Many moments on this album feel like losing time. Contemporary Movement was released in 2000. The same year Chris Takino, founder of the label Up Records, passed away. The label never fully recovered. While Duster's catalog remained in print for some time afterward, Takino's death marked the quiet end to Duster's first era. Their existing records slipped into obscurity, slowly becoming nothing more than cult artifacts within the underground scene, and no new albums were on the horizon. Eventually, all three members drifted off to pursue other projects. The satellite that was Duster lost contact with Earth, presumably lost in deep space, with no signs of future communication. With no reissues of their recordings for the foreseeable future, it seemed that their music was a rapidly fading memory of the old millennium. So the bandmates moved on, but remained in each other's orbit. Albertini and Amber left San Jose and resettled in Seattle, as the cost of living was making it increasingly difficult to stay in California. Meanwhile, Parton found a label called The Static Cult in 2005. While he loathed the tasks that came with running a label, The Static Cult streamlined the releases of post-Duster projects. Albertini formed Helvetia and recruited Amber to play the drums. Like Duster, Helvetia didn't receive widespread recognition, except for a Stereogum article naming them a band to watch in 2008. They've recorded dozens of albums since 2005. That same year, Parton debuted a solo album under the name Eiafuawn. I was curious to know more about Eiafuawn and how it was pronounced, since I know commenters are always so friendly when I mispronounce things, so I asked more about it and how to pronounce it. As a fan of Eiafuawn, have you considered releasing any more music under that moniker? Just to ensure I pronounce it correctly in the video, do you say it like Eiafuawn? He replied, I do want to finish another Eiafuawn record. I hope I can someday. I just say it Eiafuawn, but whatever works. More recently, Albertini became a bassist for Built to Spill, touring with the group and appearing on their studio albums. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned all the Duster projects in the rabbit hole, so that was the next thing I asked him. Just to ensure we mentioned all your projects, I want to make sure we aren't leaving anything out. Mohinder, Calm, Duster, Valium Aggelein, Helvetia, and Eiafuawn. It turns out I actually did miss a few because he replied, Kaden has his CA project, but he also did Ghost Girls and Lonnie Wynn. I do Eiafuawn, Two Boys Alright, and in the past I did Ghost Drugs, Parton Cooper Planetarium, El Buzzard, The Soviets, The Assassins, Breasts, and some other things. Jason does Helvetia, and he also did Agent Furrows, Granite Path, and spent some time in Built to Spill, and maybe the very first version of Queens of the Stone Age. Hi, it's been a long time, but we are recording a little bit. As silent and unassuming as their retreat into hiatus had been, Duster announced their return in 2018 with this simple message, posted beneath a photo of analog recording equipment on Instagram. 17 years had passed since the band's disintegration, and by then only a small corner of the internet, those still loyally following the band, seemed to notice. In their absence, Duster's records had become lost relics, passed around on burned CDs and sketchy downloads between friends who knew where to look. But that small group of online music nerds and chronically nostalgic indie heads felt like a flicker of excitement. The sound Duster had once been known for, lo-fi and slow burning, had in the meantime become cherished by a new generation raised on platforms like Reddit and Bandcamp. I asked him a couple questions about how Duster's music has sort of been resurrected online and how he and the group felt about it. So the question I asked was, when you recorded Stratosphere and Contemporary Movement, I'm sure you had no idea that they would be viewed as influential, lost classics. I think there's a perception online that Duster is this mysterious group that speaks to increasing isolation in America. How do you feel about your music being played on modern platforms like TikTok or Rate Your Music? He said in return, we don't have any opinion about it. We appreciate that people found something that resonated with them in some way, and on our end, it helped us be able to tour and things, but we're still mostly inactive on social media, and we don't do self-promotion or try to cultivate anything in that area, I guess. I was also curious to know when he realized their music had sort of a following online, so I asked him, when did you first realize your music had sort of a cult following? He said that people that were more connected to record collecting than we are would tell us our records were being sold for dumb high prices. This was part of why we agreed to reissue stuff with Numero. We were just going to do it ourselves, to at least let people that wanted those records to actually listen to, instead of just collecting and reselling to get them at a normal price. But we didn't have the money to do them all, had trouble tracking down original sources, Sub Pop told us they were thrown away, along with boxes of unsold original records, and we knew we'd be slow and annoyed shipping orders out, so we let Numero do it. In December 2018, Duster played their first show in 18 years in Brooklyn, New York. They were the opening act for Alex G, a songwriter who hadn't even made his first recordings when Duster disappeared, but had since become a defining figure in the gloomy indie rock scene Duster had unknowingly helped shape. 2 more headlining shows in New York followed, where the band debuted new material. 3 months later, in March 2019, Capsule Losing Contact, a box set of the band's earlier material, was released by the archival label The Numero Group. A lot of time had passed. The members of Duster had each splintered off in different directions, moving on with life outside the orbit of the band. But when they reappeared in 2019 with their comeback album, simply titled Duster, it felt comfortingly familiar. Almost like they had stepped right back into the room they had left nearly 2 decades earlier. Despite their time apart, little had changed in the process. The album was recorded in the low Earth orbit garage studio, the same way they used to do it, on 4-track cassette recorders with worn-out microphones, guitars, and amps they'd had since the 90s. Quote, not much has changed, except we have to buy cassettes on eBay instead of stealing them from the drugstore now, Clay said. Unsurprisingly, the album sounds a bit like a time capsule, coated in dust and tape hiss. Guitars drone and loop, like broken transmissions, the drums soft and slightly off balance. While some songs like Go Back and Ghost World come across as more distorted and blown out than most of their earlier material, others like Summer War feel like a direct line into the warm, skeletal fuzz of Stratosphere. Lyrically, not much has changed either, but perhaps in a world more familiar with collective anxiety, those themes of despair, collapse, and loneliness feel more immediate than they did during the band's first era. Beneath all the static, there's still that sense of connect, of old friends picking up right where they left off. Duster didn't exactly announce a new era, but they filled a silence that had stretched on for far too long. They followed up with their second post-reunion album, Together, in 2022. The release was announced through various music videos uploaded to YouTube and came as a surprise to fans. Alongside the debut of Together, Clay and Kanan announced that their bandmate Jason Albertini had since left the group. The reason for his departure was stated as a desire to focus more on his project Helvetia, although Jason himself would later reveal that mental health struggles had also contributed to his decision to leave. The themes that had long defined their music still echoed throughout the new record, but Duster's songwriting seems to have matured. The production is noticeably more polished, while placing greater emphasis on the heavier end of their sound. While songs like Feel No Joy and Sad Boys deliver exactly the kind of everyday sadness hinted at their titles, some of the weight of their earlier records appears to have lifted. Drifter and Moonroam feel more like meditations than laments. Sometimes memories are kind. What's left behind, they sing on Time Glitch, as if even in its saddest moments, Together allows space for flickers of warmth and hope. The final question I asked him was the following: I think a lot of your music reflects the darkness of the world, particularly America in decline. Things have only seemed to have gotten worse, unfortunately. Is this something you're aware of and a theme in your music? His response was yes and no. I mean, sure, there are songs explicitly about darkness and bleak voids, disappointment or solitude, but there's also songs about hope and appreciating simple things. But that's just what those songs mean to me. Once a song leaves our studio, it's not ours anymore. It's each person's own personal thing. So someone might hear comfort in a song that haunts someone else. That's one of the best things about music. By 2024, the Duster satellite had been back in orbit longer than the first transmission. Now settled somewhere between cult status and a modest level of commercial success, it makes sense that they chose to stick to their guns in their latest album, In Dreams. In Dreams, maybe more than any of their post-reunion albums, feels like a direct re-immersion into the signature sound they've carried since the band's earliest days, albeit wrapped in a more high-fidelity costume. Softer and more melancholic than Together, the album relies heavily on texture and atmosphere. The layering of guitars and synths is fantastic, maybe some of their most delicate and intricate yet, especially on tracks like Aqua Tofana or the cinematic Cosmotransporter. It's prime Duster. Once again, you're drifting through space with them. And yet, as this album unfolds, you can't help but wonder where their journey might lead, should they ever choose to leave their familiar course behind. We want to thank Clay for taking the time to answer some of our questions. Writing about Duster was a unique but enjoyable challenge, as their music comes from a parallel universe, so we appreciate his insights immensely. We avoided words like slowcore and space rock throughout this video as an attempt to respect the group and not lazily assign a label to their limitless sounds. From our audience, we'd love to hear what Duster's music means to you. Thank you so much for traveling with us through the universe of Duster. I'm going back to sleep now. See you in a few months. Stay dreamy, everyone.